Your cat has been staring at you for about 30 seconds now. Not the kind of stare that means they're hungry. Not the restless pacing near the bowl. Just still, watching, waiting for something you haven't figured out yet. You shift in your seat. They keep watching. Most people assume this is just cat behavior. Aloof, unpredictable, impossible to read. But behavioral science tells a completely different story. What your cat is doing in those quiet, unreadable moments is one of the most sophisticated forms of social evaluation documented between two different species. They are not being distant, they are not being strange. They are measuring you. Let's start with the obvious explanation, because it's the one every cat owner reaches for first. Cats are independent. They don't need reassurance the way dogs do. The watching, the testing, the occasional coldness, that's just how they're wired. But here's the problem. If cats were genuinely indifferent, they wouldn't monitor their owners at all. They wouldn't track your movements. They wouldn't change their behavior based on your emotional state. They wouldn't, and this is the part that matters, behave differently with you than with anyone else in the room. But they do, consistently, measurably, every time.
In 2015, researchers at the University of Lincoln published findings that directly challenged the popular belief that cats form no meaningful attachment to their owners. Using the same strange situation protocol developed to measure infant caregiver attachment, they found that cats showed clear signs of using their owner as a secure base, exploring more confidently when their person was present, and showing measurable changes in behavior when their person left. The cats weren't indifferent. They were watching to see if you were still there. And here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers at Kyoto University studied how cats respond to their owners in situations of uncertainty. Specifically, what happens when a cat faces something ambiguous or slightly threatening. The cats looked to their owners first, before acting, before deciding. They checked your face for information about whether the situation was safe. Scientists call this social referencing. It's the same behavior human infants use when they look at a parent's face before deciding whether to approach something new. Your cat checks your expression the way a child checks yours, not randomly, deliberately. Here's a question almost nobody thinks to ask. Why would a solitary hunter, an animal that evolved to survive completely alone, develop any need to read a human face at all? The answer goes back roughly 10,000 years, and it reframes everything. When wild cats first began living near human settlements, the ones who survived weren't necessarily the fastest or the most aggressive. They were the ones who could read human behavior well enough to know when to stay close and when to disappear. The cats who could interpret a human's emotional state, calm versus agitated, safe versus dangerous, had an enormous survival advantage. We didn't domesticate cats so much as cats domesticated themselves, and the tool they used was attention. The cat watching you from across the room is running the same ancient assessment their ancestors ran 10,000 years ago. It just looks like staring now.
Now I want to tell you about a study that nobody talks about because the finding seems impossible at first. Researchers in 2019 observed cats in household environments and found that cats whose owners showed lower emotional responsiveness, less eye contact, less vocal interaction, less physical engagement, showed higher rates of stress behaviors over time, increased hiding, reduced play, changes in eating patterns. On the surface, this seems to say that cats need constant reassurance, which contradicts the independent image entirely. But here's the deeper truth. What those cats were responding to wasn't the absence of affection. It was the absence of information. When you go quiet, when you stop engaging, when your face becomes unreadable, your cat loses their primary source of data about whether their world is safe. They don't need you to perform love. They need you to be legible. The testing isn't about passing or failing. It's about staying readable. There's one last thing I need to tell you, and it might be the most important part of this video. If your cat, who has always watched you closely, always sought proximity, always performed these small, quiet checks, suddenly stops, pay close attention to that withdrawal. A cat who stops monitoring their owner, stops slow blinking, stops following, stops positioning themselves where they can see you, that disengagement is not independence. Research on feline cognitive decline and chronic pain consistently identifies reduced social monitoring as one of the earliest behavioral shifts, before the obvious symptoms, before the vet visit. Your cat's attention toward you is not neediness, it is health. So the next time your cat sits across the room and watches you with that long, unreadable stare, remember what is actually happening. This is an animal whose entire social survival toolkit was built around reading you correctly, who checks your face before deciding if the world is safe, who monitors your presence not out of dependence, but out of a 10,000-year-old intelligence that learned, long before either of you was born, that paying attention to a human was the wisest thing a cat could do. They are not testing whether you love them enough. They already know you do. They have been studying you long enough to be certain. Subscribe and leave a comment. I want to know, what's the most specific, unreadable thing your cat does that you've never been able to explain? Next week, we're looking at why cats slow blink, what it costs them neurologically, and why it may be the most vulnerable gesture one creature can offer another.